What a journey video game adaptations have gone through. For decades, films and shows adapted from video games were complete dog shit. From Super Mario Bros. to Mortal Kombat. Welcome back to my series where I find the best adaptation of a particular medium, and this time we're going to look at video game adaptations. Can I just say that I'm so fucking glad that they're not shit anymore. For the longest time, no one ever took them seriously. In fact, its rise is similar to superhero movies. There were quite a few exceptions of older superhero films that did well, however they really rose to prominence and dominated the box office in the late 2000s. In this case for video game films and shows, it's been experiencing a rise in quality and box office success since late 2010s. And with the recent release of Arcane Season 2, which I thought was fucking brilliant, I started to wonder if it was the best ever video game adaptation. There are loads of movies and TV shows that I've considered, and I've determined that there are two other candidates that rival Arcane as the best ever video game adaptation. The Last of Us and Fallout, both of which have released within the last 2 years and are shows with a similar runtime. The Witcher was very close to making this list by the way, but I just think the other three are just one level above this show. I still really enjoyed it though. I actually haven't played any of these games before, so I'm experiencing these stories from the perspective of someone who hasn't been spoiled with anything. We're also receiving some help from Damped Popeye, a YouTuber who has also watched these shows and knows what he's talking about.
Thanks for having me. I can't wait to talk about these great shows.
I'll leave a link to his channel in the description if you guys are interested. It's time to buckle up as I created 9 categories in order to find out which video game adaptation is the best. And it's now time to determine which show has the best story. All 3 of these stories are engaging and emotional throughout the show. The Last of Us and Fallout in particular have incredibly engaging hooks that made me want to immediately watch the following few episodes. Whilst Arcane and Fallout follow stories that are incredibly enjoyable from start to finish, The Last of Us experiences a major drop in quality halfway through the show. Its pacing is interesting because for most of the show, the story unravels at a consistent and exciting pace. But at other points, I got very bored due to some pacing issues.
I agree that there were definitely parts where I was bored and it took a lot of willpower to not just skip 10 seconds ahead, but I feel the show makes up for this by having strong emotional points that damn near brought me to tears on a couple occasions.
Its episodes also often end brilliantly, often in traumatic ways such as the end of episode 4. Now this is how you maintain an audience's interest in a story. Arcane clearly establishes the complexity of this world's issues from the beginning, mainly with the tension between the surface dwellers and the underground, symbolizing the rich and the poor.
It doesn't try to favor any side as both the surface dwellers and the underground have done wrong.
This makes the story very intriguing to watch as both sides have a case for being the victim. And with the addition of Hextech, it's interesting to watch how people use such power. However, what really makes its story better than The Last of Us is the second season, as everything becomes grander in scale, and by constantly showcasing the repercussions of characters' actions, I find myself sitting on the edge of my seat in fear of how much more this world continues its downfall, thus having my full engagement with the story. However, the show that had me most interested as to what would happen next is Fallout.
I couldn't agree more. The show really does a great job at keeping you interested with plot points of wondering what happened to Lucy's parents.
And as someone who has never played any of these games before, I will therefore be shocked with any reveal. I really wanted to know why a fucking nuclear bomb went off, so watching the show slowly reveal it became all the more interesting. I had so many questions throughout my entire viewing of the show. What happened to Lucy's father? What is Moldaver's motivation? What just happened in that flashback? And what the fuck happened to the other vaults?
By far my favorite was getting to see the ghoul's backstory from being the stereotypical hero in those Western movies who refuses to kill to becoming a notorious bounty hunter.
The show creates all these questions and it knows how to retract information from the audience and slowly reveals its story and twists at the appropriate moment, therefore making me want to keep watching the show. So, I think Fallout has the best story out of these 3 shows, therefore deserving the 3 points. Arcane gets 2 points and The Last of Us gets 1, which by the way is still an incredible story to witness. It's definitely the most beautiful story of the 3, so I wouldn't argue against someone who would put this story at first, which really speaks volumes to the quality of shows we are dealing with today. It is now time to talk about the characters. Fallout follows 3 separate characters, one of which being the Antagonist, so we'll talk about him once we get to that category.
He's easily my favorite character in the show, so I can't wait to talk about him.
I really like how much of an underdog Maximus is. He's kind of a fuck up in the beginning of the show, but then finds himself with this overpowered as fuck suit, and so kind of has to rise to the occasion with such power, and it's enjoyable to watch.
I couldn't care about his character at all, and I think that just comes down to him not really being that interesting of a character. When I saw he's part of the Brotherhood of Steel, my only concern was getting to see the T-64 power armor, not if he survives or dies. Really, the only time I got invested in his character was getting to see him enjoy vault living since he's been raised by the remnants of the old military, even if the vault is very unique, to put it lightly, and he says a very interesting line.
You want to make my cock explode now? Sorry, intercourse?
Nah, I fucking love that line. It's so out of pocket. Lucy is definitely my favorite character of the show though. I love it when a character experiences an entire world for the first time just like the viewer. So it feels like the audience is in this together with Lucy. She's also unreasonably nice to literally everyone. It's both funny and wholesome to watch. We don't know enough about the side characters due to the mystery of this show, or they don't particularly stand out. Whilst the main characters are both good, I never developed an emotional attachment to these guys, especially compared to the characters from Arcane. Speaking of Lucy being my favorite character, played by Ella Pernell, she also plays Jinx within Arcane, who's up there with Jace as my favorites. She's honestly one of my favorite actors working today, and I can't wait to see how her career pans out. Arcane has the widest selection of excellent characters. You could be in a room of like 5 people and they all might have different favorite characters from the show, and they could be completely valid. My favorite aspect of these characters is that almost everyone has complex motivations, so you understand where they're coming from.
Jinx is easily my favorite character, and by far my favorite part of her character is the relationship she has with Vi. The slow mending of Vi and Jinx's relationship was great to watch, as we also get the great fight in episode 3 of season 2. We also get to see another side of her in the second season as she develops this friendship with this girl Isha, where we see it becomes her goal to help her try and have a somewhat normal life until it gets ripped away from her in episode 6, and we get to see this beautiful montage of how much fun they had.
Vi feels guilty for creating a monster such as Jinx and must therefore convert her back into Powder. However, as the show continues, her motivations change due to her belief that Powder is gone. There are so many characters who go through an arc such as hers, with Jace having a fantastic arc himself by trying to overcome an evil that he's created. With that being said, there are certain characters that feel very rushed in the show, such as Mel in season 2, and Vander was very underutilized in my opinion. However, The Last of Us has to take first place, as in my opinion, the characters are what makes up the heart and soul of this show. I was very emotionally connected with the main characters of this show. We witnessed both Joel and Ellie gradually warming up to each other over the course of a long period. Both of them have lost family members, so as viewers we really want them to stick together, but Joel's personality makes it difficult, which keeps the viewers watching in order to find out what would happen. The side characters are just as incredible despite the limited screen time due to everyone fucking dying all the time. Which is definitely a good thing by the way. This world is meant to be cruel and hard to live in, so characters dying all the time makes the world building so much better.
The religious cult is pretty interesting with the way their leader kept twisting their faith to justify their Donner Party actions.
And I was also so prepared to love Henry and Sam for the remainder of the show. Henry had spent so much time protecting his younger brother, only for him to get infected and kill himself at the very end.
Damn it, I knew they were gonna die, but I was still so incredibly invested in them.
Those two being on screen has some of my favorite ever scenes, and yet they're only my third favorite duo in the series, because the characters in the show are just so incredibly written. Oh, and don't worry, we'll talk about these guys once we get to a certain section of this video. So, for these reasons, I'm giving 3 points to The Last of Us, followed by Arcane with 2 and Fallout with 1. Now, the tone is a very underrated aspect of a show. Does the show succeed in making the audience feel the way they want us to? Are the characters acting appropriately to the events happening in the show? And does it stay consistent throughout each episode? Fallout has a lot of charm to it, and it balances well with the crazy shit that happens on the side. Lucy and Maximus in particular have excellent chemistry together, and so when they eventually meet each other, it's like all the bad shit that has happened to this depressing world goes away for a moment. Which is also because of Lucy's immaturity and not fully comprehending the situation, which is quite comedic, which this show is really good at. This show clearly represents the Fallout suits as strong and intimidating, so watching Maximus fail miserably is both fun to watch and raises the stakes.
It does really surprise me with the comedic elements working so well, despite the world being in as bleak of a situation as you can get. But I guess you can put the spin of, well, make lemons to lemonade to at least make living in this hell somewhat more pleasant.
Of course, it's a really bad idea to lean too heavily towards the comedy, as we learned from the MCU. However, Fallout thankfully doesn't fall under this trap. Arcane is an interesting case, as they're good at showcasing the world through the lens of each character. Vi has barely cracked a smile since being a kid, so the tone is always dark whenever she's on screen, which works well in conjunction with the rest of the characters, particularly the ones living in privilege on the surface. Jace, Victor, and Mel are all characters who have lived pretty good lives from the looks of it, before Hextech was ever invented. It's therefore powerful to witness those same people slowly lose a sense of themselves and aren't able to show off their personality.
It doesn't drop its dark tone, but rather increases it as the story progresses.
And so the overall tone of the show turns darker as the episodes progress, which is why Jinx is such fresh air. She loves this shit, so whenever she's on screen, there's a beam of energy, which is very healthy for the show in my opinion.
She is such a joy to watch. Her calling out Vi on her bullshit in season 2 of episode 5 is honestly hilarious to watch.
But the top spot has to once again go to The Last of Us. Its world is just miserable as fuck, and the show really emphasizes on it. We are constantly reminded that moments of joy are temporary.
Yeah, I think out of any of these worlds, this would be the one where I would find dying to be a better outcome.
There's a powerful episode where Ellie and the two brothers actually feels joy, with something as simple as children playing football together, only for him and his older brother to fucking die at the end of that episode. It clearly devastated Ellie, however barely even phases Joel as he's been through this for 20 years. This show does a phenomenal job at playing with our mood and emotions, bringing us a sense of joy and hope only for it to crumble back down moments later.
The only true glimmer of hope we get after the brothers is the city they come to in Jackson, Wyoming, where we see the only last bit of the old world.
No wonder Joel comes to love Ellie over time, as she's one of the only people in the entire show who has an ounce of energy and personality left in her, which is a testament of her resilience and positivity despite everything that's happened to her. So, The Last of Us takes the lead with those 3 points, followed by Arcane and then Fallout. Now we discuss an interesting topic, which is really a question of which show is best when it's at their peak. Which show has the best episode? Fallout was enjoyable from start to finish, with its best episode being the last one in my opinion. I absolutely love it when a season ends strongly because then I can't wait for the next season, which might come out early next year by the way, so I'm super excited. There are so many questions that are answered, but those answers also lead to more questions. It's genuinely one of my favorite things a show can do. It includes the scene with Lucy and her father with that big reveal. Nolan enters the vault with all the sleeping people and the action is very good between the ghoul and Maximus.
I think the best episode of Fallout is episode 4 in my opinion, mostly because I like getting to see Lucy and the ghoul together, wandering through the desert. Also, seeing Lucy adapt to the surface even more by realizing you can't trust everyone is nice getting to see. While that is all happening, we also get to find out what happened with Vault 32.
However, there are certainly better episodes on this list. Now here comes a statistic for you. The lowest rated episode in Arcane Season 2 is a 9 out of 10. And it is from that season where I think it holds the best episode from that show. Season 2, Episode 7. You guys remember Marvel's What If? The animated show with alternate timelines. Yeah, well, Arcane basically does that, but infinitely better. Echo's rise as a character within Season 2 was amazing to watch. And watching him, someone from the underground who has mostly experienced pain and is in constant fear of the world he's living in, actually enjoy himself is simultaneously beautiful and absolutely heart-wrenching.
We get to see a world without hex tech, and we see how much better life is here. And Echo and Powder are in a relationship, with the highlight of the episode for me being the dance Echo and Powder have to the beautiful song Ami Aller Enemy. I pronounced that so wrong.
And whilst this is all happening, we also see Jace's perspective, a timeline where everyone is fucking dead due to his creation. It really highlights who the real antagonist is. It's hex tech. If it never existed, Victor would have never been so obsessed and Jinx would have never turned so evil. Echo comes back to his world and aims to enlighten it just like the world experienced, whereas Jace aims to prevent suffering like he saw in his timeline. They both experience pain in completely different ways and it's honestly beautiful to watch. However, for me, by far the best episode between those 3 shows comes from The Last of Us, Episode 3. I've wanted to talk about this episode for the longest time. It's become one of my favorite episodes of any show, let alone these shows. We start off with Bill, a survivalist who plans to spend the rest of his days alone, safe from the outside world. And in comes this man, begging for help. Bill is very skeptical of this situation, and there's awkward moments of silence between these men. And so watching these guys evolve to love each other throughout the episode genuinely felt like its own movie.
Getting to see Bill and Frank live as normal of a life as you can get from an apocalypse as bleak as this one is so beautiful.
They start having small arguments about how they should live the rest of their lives, as Bill is too scared to leave, whereas Frank wants something more.
Bill and Frank's last day together honestly brought me to tears. It's just absolute cinema.
It's funny because this episode doesn't really contribute that much to the main plot. It's kind of like its own thing and almost feels like an hour-long movie. It's an episode that, if removed, wouldn't ultimately change the overall story very much.
Honestly, I didn't really even care that we didn't get to see Joel and Ellie all that much, just because these two are so captivating to watch.
It's an episode that has stuck with me ever since, and it's probably in my top 5 favorite episodes of every show that I've watched. And so it deserves the first place for this ranking. Episode 5 is almost just as good as well, which really showcases the incredible start this show has. So with that, The Last of Us takes first place 3 times in a row and holds a firm lead with 10 points, followed by Arcane with 8 and Fallout with 6. Will The Last of Us maintain its lead? Stay tuned to find out as we now discuss the opposite of this category, which shows fail the most when it's at their worst. I'll start off with the least worst episode that each show offers and therefore granting them 3 points. Arcane. Specifically Season 1 Episode 2, which is still a good episode by the way. but the first few episodes are the most important in the show, and so you need to hook your audience in order to get them to keep watching. And for me, that happened in episode 3. This episode focuses on the repercussions on the end of the first episode, which is when the Hex Tech exploded. So then we get to see Jace complaining for not doing anything wrong and trying to convince the council to use Hex Tech, whilst we have Vanda refusing to go to war with the surface dwellers. Still a good episode for the show as it sets up the following few episodes. However, by itself, nothing really interesting happens, which isn't great for a second episode. But hey, at least episode 3 was fucking brilliant.
Yeah, season 1, episode 2 is the worst, but honestly it's still really good, which just goes to show how high quality the episodes of this show are.
Similarly to Arcane, I don't think Fallout has a single bad episode. However, if I had to choose, it'd be the second to last episode, episode 7. Lucy and Maximus are probably at their best in this episode, and the ending of the episode gets me excited for the finale. But they spend too long at the vault, and the doctor shit could have been removed. Overall, still a good episode. It's a little bit like Arcane episode 2 actually. Very important for the next episode, but by itself, it's not an episode that I'm especially looking forward to if I were ever to rewatch this show.
Yeah, episode 7 is the worst, in quotations, but once again, it's not a bad episode by any means, since it plays an important part for that really great final episode that leaves me excited for season 2 of the show.
However, we now move on to an episode that I would legitimately call bad. It's such a shame because this show was on pace to be incredible from start to finish. However, pacing is very important, and it actually took me weeks to finish the last few episodes compared to the first 6 episodes taking like a few days. There was a noticeable lack of quality in the previous episode, but nothing to be concerned about. However, then we get to episode 7, and I was seriously falling asleep throughout the entire episode. If you don't remember what happens, it's basically Ellie and Riley getting drunk and hanging out. That's literally it.
Episode 6 leaves you wondering what happened to Joel, but instead we get to see Ellie and Riley do shenanigans in a mall, which just leaves you thinking, what the hell?
They definitely had good chemistry with each other, and it was a little sad how it ended. But honestly, the basic premise for that episode is almost exactly the same as episode 3, but done a lot worse. It took forever to get to the mall, and once they got there, it just felt like they were doing side quests.
I feel that if instead of dedicating this backstory to a whole episode, maybe if they broke it up into flashbacks throughout the previous episodes, it could have made this a lot better. Also, there's the fact that this episode is so boring to get through. It took everything for me to not just skip this episode completely.
So yeah, it only gets 1 point for having the worst episode, with Fallout getting 2 and Arcane getting 3. It's now time to talk about how beautiful these shows look. Part of what makes a movie have great cinematography and animation is developing a style that becomes synonymous with that property. Franchises such as John Wick and the Batman come to mind, as a single shot makes the audience immediately recognize which franchise it belongs to. And I'm happy to say that all 3 of these shows have a style that you'll immediately recognize and therefore distance themselves in uniqueness from its competitors. The Last of Us has some great cinematography, and one thing it's great at is maintaining the atmosphere. Side note, but I won't be talking about how good the world looks in these shows, as we'll discuss that in the world building category. I love the horror elements within this show, particularly with the infected that can only hear. And so I'm holding my breath because I don't want to make the noise, and the cinematography really adds to those scenes. I know that shaky cam gets a lot of shit because you can't see anything, but when it's used right, it works so damn well, especially in states of panic.
I think my favorite piece of cinematography was that great long one shot in the first episode with the 3 of them being in the car.
And the use of lighting is also done very well. The characters are almost always in the dark, which adds to the atmosphere.
There are so many intense scenes that get better because of the lighting being as intense as it is. The scene in the museum had me on the edge of my seat.
However, Fallout looks even better. Of course the effects could look better with certain creatures, but the suit in particular looks and functions great.
The T-64 looks and moves so fluently, with the set pieces looking great everywhere, with the best being the vaults in my opinion.
I really enjoy the style difference between the vaults and the surface. In the beginning of the show, you don't think living in the vaults is too bad. However, as the episodes progress, the sense of claustrophobia really gets to you. Also, those commercials are so excellently shot and really sells the vibe of an advertisement. Okay. Time to talk about Arcane's insane animation. Man, it's this shit incredible to look at. It's genuinely the best animation I've ever seen, bar the Spider-Verse movies, which is an incredible thing to say for something that isn't even a movie. The style is brilliant, and its stunning use of color gravitates audiences to want more.
This show's art style is very much using a watercolor style for its animation. I believe it's this style because I've tried to mimic it for a couple art pieces and found that watercolor is the style that best matches this to the show.
But most of all, the animation peaks with its action scenes. It excellently uses slow motion, dynamic camera movement, incredible lighting, and a complete change in animation style.
I like the way they drop frames with certain scenes, and almost every time you pause the screen you can notice tiny details you might have missed. Also, the impact frames are so cool to look at.
I could seriously go on for such a long time with how gorgeous this show looks. And this is coming from someone who rarely even credits animation. It's seriously only rivaled by Spider-Verse. And if these groups of talented artists ever make a movie from this show with a super high budget, I wouldn't bet against them surpassing those movies. If you're familiar with my channel, you probably already know how much I adore and value a soundtrack of shows and movies. Fallout implements a soundtrack that is from the games, and is another reason as to why this show brings the world of Fallout to life.
It uses songs that are from the 50s and 60s era of music, with the most iconic song, I Don't Want to Set the World on Fire by the Ink Spots, being the main highlight, since it's the track most people associate with the Fallout series. I'd say this is my favorite of the soundtracks, just because I like pretty much all the songs from this.
The Last of Us has a soundtrack that at times is fucking terrifying. Whereas a movie like Dune likes to use loud sounds within its songs for more intense scenes, this show does the opposite with very subtle hints of music, and then when something bad happens, the music pops off. Plus, that intro is fire as fuck. However, the original game score from The Last of Us is better than the show's.
Yeah, I admit that as well. The game score is just so nice to listen to.
And if you've seen my video game ranking, you'd know that I rate video game soundtracks made by Naughty Dog. But now it's time to talk about Arcane. I'm obsessed with the soundtrack of the show. No, seriously, I've been listening to most of these songs on repeat whilst writing the script of these videos.
I really like Arcane soundtrack, even though I do think there's a couple duds in the soundtrack. Like, the version of Heavy of the Crown they played in episode 1, I really didn't like this version. The Linkin Park version kicks ass, but personally, I would put Fallout soundtrack over Arcane's.
Now, I've actually seen some complaints with the music, which is that it feels like there's a music video playing in each episode. However, I didn't get that impression at all. It was just a good way to show off its insane battles. And just because I want to, here's my top 5 favorite songs from the show. In terms of the production of these shows, Arcane is head and shoulders clear of the other two. I'd argue that Arcane has the highest production value of any show I've ever seen, and fully deserves the 3 points from this category, followed by The Last of Us and Fallout. Just like soundtracks, I believe that world building is criminally underrated and adds to the immersion of a story. And it's arguably even more important in shows than movies due to the extended period of time you spend in this world. I'm pleased to say that all 3 of these shows have some excellent world building, starting with The Last of Us. The first 30 minutes of the show sets up the world brilliantly,
giving you subtle hints as to how the infection started, like we hear the radio in the background saying an infection in Jakarta is happening. We see their old neighbor acting weird. Then once Sarah's let out of school, we see everyone is in a mad panic to close their doors and get back to their house.
It then continues to showcase how the infection was created and immediately shows the aftermath of such a tragedy. The living conditions of the people not infected are very interesting, and I really like how some districts are miserable to live in and others are actually not so bad. And we only find out about the scope of this world because of how much Ellie and Joel travel, which is amazing to watch as they pass through cities that are completely infected with the fungi or lovely snow landscapes with little threat. Arcane's world building is absolutely phenomenal as well. One thing that I want to mention is that we only get to see the fungi affect everyone in the first few minutes of its inception, and we cut forward like 20 years and see the aftermath. However, this time we get to see how X-Sticks evolves as the show comes along. Watching this source of power slowly turn from a cure to a curse is fascinating to watch and makes this world building a lot more complex.
The difference we see with the surface and the underground is great, and it really hits you with the fact that this is truly a poor versus the rich scenario, considering how vastly different the two societies are.
However, what really made the show go above The Last of Us was the second season. Like seriously, we see different dimensions and shit now. Even the little details are super interesting, such as the huge power conductor being built underground even though surface dwellers use it. And it's because if it ever explodes, only the underground will feel the effects, which is truly awful but something the real world would do. Fallout has to take the cake here though. It seriously felt like I was living in the world of Fallout. It's so impressive and was a massive reason as to why I was so hooked and immersed by the story.
It excellently shows how good the people in the vaults really have it compared to the surface. While the vault dwellers live a life of luxury and something similar to the old world, the surface for the most part is a barren wasteland surrounded by bounty hunters, mutants, and death.
For me, it has some of the best set designs of most shows out there. Similarly to The Last of Us, it's exciting watching these characters travel through this world, especially Lucy, since it's also her first time discovering everything. As mentioned in the cinematography section, the level of difference between the vaults and the surface was so huge. But what makes me love this world so much is the history, as I wanted to know why and when these bombs went off. So we see that Arcane holds such a lead that it has already won this debate. However, the fight for second place between Fallout and The Last of Us is determined by the final category, the Antagonist. But I'm going to create some tension, so I'm going to talk about Arcane first. The thing I love most about Arcane's Antagonist is that you're unsure of who to root for, particularly in Season 2. Jinx and Sato were the clear villains of the first season, and they were both absolutely brilliant. They made a great duo, they were brutal as fuck, and they were a lot of fun. However, as the show progresses, a lot of rage is fueled up inside certain characters, and so they become blinded by their rage, all whilst Jinx of all characters proceeds to slowly turn into a hero. For a while I wasn't sure who to root for as everyone has such complex motivations. We come to find out that Victor is the biggest antagonist of the second season, which I definitely didn't predict back in season 1, and his development makes a fuck ton of sense.
I find Victor to be a great antagonist after being given his new body and power. He then tries to do what he believes is right, even if it means turning into a so-called god by trying to make everyone into a unified hive mind.
He genuinely thinks he's doing the right thing, which makes him a great villain. For this reason, I'm giving Arcane 2 points for having the second best antagonist out of these 3 shows, which means the show who has the least best antagonist will finish last in this debate. And the answer to that question is... Fallout! Fallout's antagonist changes throughout the series, and there's suggested to be a bigger threat that we may not fully understand yet. The obvious threat in the beginning is Lee Moldaver and her crew with the Vaults, along with the Ghoul later on the surface, who by the way is my second favourite character behind Lucy, and he honestly steals every scene he is in. However, we come to realise that he's simply a victim of war, and our perspective of the real antagonist changes particularly in that episode, as Moldaver reveals the horrible crimes committed by Lucy's father. It also feels like you're always walking on eggshells, because you're unsure of who the enemy is. Lucy just rocks up to this town, and as an audience you're just like, yeah, something bad is about to happen.
I was a little let down by Fallout's antagonist because I'm honestly not a huge fan of twist villains, and surprise, Lucy's father is the villain. I think Lucy's father could have worked if they ended up showing him doing more evil shit on screen rather than just having it explained to us by Moldaver.
But my vote for the show with the best antagonist has to go to The Last of Us. Understandably, most zombie stories makes the zombies the main threat, just like this show. However, I love it when there's more threats than the zombies, such as regular people desperate for food and shelter, and in the case for our characters, Fedra, who at points pose more of a threat than the fungi. I actually forgot that the zombies were the real threat because of how dangerous Fedra can be.
It puts its own creative spin on it, like Train to Busan does. The zombies in the show are actually terrifying in this, given that over the 20 years the virus learned to evolve, and we see that with the variants like the bloater who are bigger and stronger than just the normal clicker is.
There's no space for any mistakes, as shown in the second episode when stepping on one fungi. Sure, Ellie is just a kid in this mess, but Joel isn't exactly a hero himself from Fedra's perspective, just like Henry. So Fedra's motivations to kill them are justifiable. But honestly, the reason why I'd give The Last of Us all 3 points is because I was terrified of the infection before it was even formed, and it's due to the brilliant opening scene. Then cut to another scene where we simply look at 2 people talking about the fungi. It has some of the best acting out of all 3 of these shows. And so the stage is set. The fungi is the antagonist of the show, and I'm honest to God scared shitless of this thing, especially because it sounds like something that could happen in real life. Thus, we see that Fallout isn't able to move up any places, as The Last of Us finishes in second and Arcane finishes first with a solid 3-point lead and is therefore announced as the best movie or show adapted from a video game. I remember watching Arcane Season 1 during a 10-day hike in Mount Kosciuszko. I was very skeptical going into it as it's based on League of Legends, and the only thing I knew about that game is that people needed to touch grass. But man, was I blown away. One of the best things about Arcane is that it's original. It's such a fresh show in this modern day market where everything is a sequel or remake, which includes The Last of Us by the way, as it's a very faithful adaptation and is a big criticism for a lot of people. So getting something as rare and unique as Arcane is truly something special and deserves to be named the best video game adaptation ever made, even if the Game Awards gave it to Fallout. Some people say it's the greatest animated show of all time, and whilst I personally disagree due to the stiff competition, I can totally hear where they're coming from. And the best part is that they're continuing storytelling within this world, even if Iron Jinx's story has come to an end. Here's another look into how I distributed my final points. And for those of you who are curious, Popeye has also provided us with his final points tally.
Thank you, Butter, for having me. I had a great time talking about these great shows with you. If you want to check me out, I talk about movies and shows along with some other topics. I also have some really cool ideas in the works for next year, so if you're interested, feel free to check me out.
I hope you guys enjoyed the video, but more importantly, enjoy the Christmas holiday. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with my placements, and if there are other video game adaptations that I didn't talk about. I'll have one final video for you guys before the end of the year, which is a 2024 movie ranking. So if you don't want to miss it, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Alright, I'll catch you guys in the next video. See ya!